Good morning. How are we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're just going to review a hand sent in by Josh. This is a hand from Live25, and without further ado, let's check it out. So in this hand, there are a couple of folds, villain open limps, fold, and here decides to attack to 25 with 8-9 offsuit on the button. Now, Josh did not give any information in the write-up, so in this situation, I'm just kind of going to assume that villain is more on the passive fishy side of the spectrum, mostly because open limping is usually pretty passive fishy thing to do. So I'm going to run with that assumption for the time being. I personally think 8-9 off is a little bit too weak, a little bit too wide to isolate with in this situation, but I always love to see aggression over passivity, and yeah, at least we're on the button in case things go awry. I personally think it's a pinch too wide, but we'll work with it and go forward from here. So we end up getting called by villain, not too shocking. We end up flopping an open ender, that's always fun. Check, we bet, totally good so far. If I get an open ender, chances are I'm going to be aggressive with it and continue. So totally good with this so far. Villain calls, turn we improve, makes life nice and fun. Villain checks, and hero continues betting for 70 on the turn. So I know that I complain about bet sizing all of the time, and unfortunately I need to continue it here. So think about villain's range. Think about the kind of hands that villain is going to call the flop with, limp call preflop, check call flop. What are they going to have there a lot of the time? Sure, they could have some slow played 10x, they could have 7x, they could have the same hand that we have, or they could have, like pocket 5s, pocket 8s, any sort of like weird weakish stuff that a passive fish is more likely to have. And I think that if villain is going to continue, they're going to continue with things like 7x, and of course some of the 7x they have is either going to pick up like bottom two pair with like 7-6, obviously that's negated, but they could also have things like 7-8, 7-9, and they could have like 6-8 and 6-9 and things like that, again depending on exactly how passive fishy we're talking. So I think that if villain is going to continue, they're going to do so with pairs, pair and draws, and of course trips, and I think they're going to do so fairly inelastically, which means that when they continue, they're going to continue at roughly the same frequency regardless of the size. You don't have to bet 500 here, but chances are if you bet somewhere between 75 and 100 and change, they're going to call that at roughly the same frequency with the range that we just talked about. So with that in mind, I'd really like to see a larger size here, really punish the times that they have either sticky trips, sticky pairs, pair plus draw, whatever they need to get sticky with, whatever they need to see a river with, punish them for it. So because of that, I really like to see this be a little bit closer to 100. I think 70 leaves some money on the table. And again, if they have that kind of like sticky draw hand, this is probably going to be our last major chance to get value from it. So we end up getting called by villain. Okay, fine. River is an ace, and all of a sudden villain leads into us for 45. So this is where things get a little bit wonky. So I'm going to first start by showing you what happened, and then we're going to talk about the whole thing. So in this situation, hero raises, and typically most people would raise in this situation, raises to $1.50, which of course is pretty small compared to the overall size of the pot, because villain's bet size was so small in the first place. Villain decides to 3-bet, and hero decides to fold. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through and have the rest of this conversation. So at first glance, you may look at this $150 raise and say, wow, that is just ridiculous. That is a completely awful play, bad Josh, bad. Now, I will say that at first glance, I looked at this and I had the same thought. I was like, this is weird. It just can't possibly be good. But then I sat there and I thought about it for a moment. And this is what you want to be doing when you're analyzing hands, whether it's your own hands, hands on a forum, hands on these videos, whatever it is. Even if you see a play that at first glance looks absolutely ridiculous and awful, always at least ponder for a moment, could there be a time and place for that play? Could there be some validity? Could there be some assumption that would make this play good? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but at least by doing that, you're stretching your poker brain and you're really challenging your original assumptions. It helps you get out of getting stuck in this like default, overly standard play that oftentimes will keep you from taking more optimal lines because you're veering away from creativity. So that's kind of my small little rant and ramble on that. In this situation, I think that if we raise, we can still get called when villain has sticky 10x, and that's mostly what we're looking to get called by. Maybe sticky 7x, but realistically, we're probably looking at trying to get called by sticky trips. Now, looking at villain's line, what do they have here, right? What did they go limp call preflop, check call turn, and then lead for almost pentapot on the river? I mean, what are they doing that with? I think sticky trips make sense. I think weird 7x that's trying to see a river for cheaper makes sense. I think maybe, I don't know how the heck you would get here with an ace, but maybe like ace 8, ace 9 could make a little bit of sense. So ultimately, I think there are hands that can and will call your raise that are second best. Now, at first glance, you may look at this and say, well, given the size of the pot right now, if I were to make a pot size raise, it's roughly a shove, so why don't we just shove here? I think that if you shove 10-9, Jack-10, all those kind of hands, they go away. I don't think you're going to get looked up by just trips in this situation. And if I have information on villain, obviously my opinion on that can change quite quickly, but I don't think as a pure default that's going to be the case. So, in this exact scenario, I think that when you shove, you only get looked up by boats and the same hand, in which case, again, there's no value being generated. So, looking at the smaller raise size, I say, okay, well, what if I raise to something like 200? Then could I get looked up by sticky trips, weird ace-x, whatever it is? And I think you can. But I also think this, if you raise to something like 200 here, yes, a little bit bigger than the 150 chosen, if you raise to 200 and they decide to 3-bet ship, I think you're always behind, right? I don't think they shove there with Jack 10 or anything like that. I think it's really only like weird boats and same hand, and I don't even think same hand is going to be there a ton of the time. So because of that, I actually don't mind raise fold here. And it's not going to be like raise for pot, because again, pot's going to be too large. I actually don't mind raise folding for like a $1.90, something like that. I think you can get looked up by enough second best. And it's kind of sparked by this, looking at this creative like raise to 150, not saying it was necessarily good or bad or done with the right reasoning, but I think it's the right thought process here, is to raise fold and make with the overall assumption that if you shove here, you don't get looked up by second best. If you go to about 200, you can get looked up by second best, and you will. And if you raise to 200 and they shove, that they only have boats, right? So that's the overall assumption matrix that I'm using here. And because of that, I actually really like just raising to something like a $1.90 and folding if they decide to jam. So in this exact scenario, again, we end up facing the 3-bet. Hero decides to fold. All well and good. Totally fine with that. But I think that it's really important when you see something that you view as bad or you view as ridiculous, stop and ponder and wonder, could that be good? Are there any places where that does make sense? Because it will force you to expand your playbook, it will force you to challenge your original assumptions, and that will inherently make you a much stronger player at the end of the day. So Josh, thank you very much for the great hand, and hopefully this helps you play this spot a little bit better in the future. And again, I really like what you're doing on the river, just want to make sure it's being done with kind of the right rationale. And again, I think the size could be a bit larger both on the turn and the river as played. So thank you so much for hanging out today, guys. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. And also, if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing, I would really appreciate it. And this isn't one of those channels where I just ask you to subscribe because I like having a higher subscriber count. It's because when I post a video, I usually only respond to comments in that video for roughly the first week. So if you're a subscriber, you get that video first. You're going to be able to get your comments and questions answered more readily rather than hoping that I find it 6 months later, which I don't always end up doing. But again, thank you so much for hanging out today, guys. I really appreciate it. I'll see you back soon with a brand new video. And of course, as always, good luck out there and happy grinding.